Radical.
Nintendo is apparently making it quite difficult for third-party developers to put games onto their new system, the Switch 2. And some developers were told, actually, to go ahead and put their game, make it for the Switch 1, and then, with backward compatibility, people can play it on the Switch 2. Seriously. We already have a situation to where many people, I've heard from people in my own comment section telling me they just went ahead and skipped this entire Series X PlayStation 5 generation so far because they haven't had a legitimate reason for getting something like a PlayStation 5 versus keeping their good old trusty PS4. Hell, a lot of games that came out for the PS5 also came out for the PS4. But that's just one example where nowadays gamers are dealing with much more expensive systems, and they have to find reasoning within their budget to put all the money down on the new system. You would think if Nintendo really wants to sell a lot of Switch 2s, past the initial excitement FOMO stage where a lot of people will get a Nintendo console, if they want to continue sales, you would think they would want to actually have a strong third-party support and help those developers put games on their Switch 2. Now, the Switch 1 was a runaway massive success. It was a rare instance to where, you have a really popular Nintendo console that had good first-party games and a robust third-party library, I would say, and support. This is in sharp contrast to things like the Wii U, for instance, the GameCube, systems that notoriously fell way behind the Xbox and the PlayStation as far as third-party support. And that's one reason a lot of people say, well, they'll get a PlayStation or an Xbox and a Nintendo to play Zelda and the Marios and all that kind of stuff on their Nintendo system, but then they'll focus for the third-party games on their usually much more powerful PlayStations and Xboxes and just play the Nintendo games, like I said, on the Switch or whatever console Nintendo comes out with at the time. So why are they making it difficult for these third-party developers? Well, apparently, these developers are saying it's really difficult to get their hands on a Switch 2 dev kit to even start the process of making games for the Switch 2. And they're told to actually go ahead and put their games, make them for the Switch 1, and we'll just, advertise it as backward compatible and all that kind of stuff. That really calls into question the need to even get a fucking Switch 2 right now, unless you want Mario Kart or Donkey Kong, right? It really calls into that, the question of if you want to put down a lot of money on $80 games in the Switch 2 right now, like Mario Kart, you want to drop $1,000 on a Switch 2, not even including if you want to get some extra accessories, knowing full well that Nintendo seems to be actively not encouraging, discouraging third-party development on their system, that they're desperately trying to sell to people as what? A new system that maybe has robust third-party support? Oh yeah, you don't need to worry about what Xbox and PlayStation are doing. This is your one-stop shop to get our great Nintendo exclusives and a lot of third-party games. It would be something if that was the case, but it's not the case. And there's one curious case to where there's a game called Chillin' by the Campfire, which can't be used on the Switch 1 because the Switch 2 has extra cameras, and it uses cameras. It's a small game. It's not a AAA game, but it's called Chillin' by the Fire. And that's pointed out by some of these developers saying, why are they giving dev kits? They're making just a Chillin' by the Fire game. Literally, I think they're called Oink Oink games. So Nintendo chose to give Oink Games access to their dev kits to make a game for the Switch 2, but they're holding off on it for some third-party, AAA third-party developers. Could also be a reason is maybe they're feeling like, I don't know, I can't talk to you from a technical point, but there was one situation, I forget what game it was. It was an open world game. Was it Elden Ring, I think? Yeah, it was Elden Ring. Elden Ring, apparently, there was a booth that had Elden Ring playing on the Switch 2, and no one was allowed to go in there and take any video of it playing. And reportedly, it played like garbage. We're talking about 15 frames a second on the Switch 2. And that could be optimization. It could be harder to develop for the Switch 2. It could be a problem with, the makers of Elden Ring. But the fact stands that that's a little bit shocking to have this brand new spanking hardware that they're expecting, $400 to $500 for. $500 if you get the bundle with Mario Kart World. And, this is kind of like a red flag right now. That third-party support might not be as robust on the Switch 2 compared to the Switch 1 if this continues. It could just be something happening at the beginning of the Switch 2 generation. But, if I'm a person that's maybe just want to get one game console, let's say I just want to get one game console. For whatever reason, I can only afford one game console, or I only have room to really have one in my living room or whatnot. Why the fuck would you choose a Switch 2 versus a PlayStation 5 or a Series X? Or, like the new system that will be coming out in a couple years. PS6 and Xbox Series X times 2. Why wouldn't you just hold off and save your money and get one of those systems that will be far more advanced technically than a Nintendo Switch 2? At this point, third-party games take over most things. I don't know if it always used to be that way, but now you have the first-party developers, which is Microsoft Gaming and Sony, and then Nintendo, seemingly putting out less games than they did before, less big hits, that is. So if that's the case, why would you need a Switch 2 right now? Like legitimately. Why would any of you need to buy a system right now? I don't think there's any need to ever buy a system at launch. Ever. Because, you're kind of like early adopters of the system. And when it comes to Nintendo, they always release a OLED version of it or a different version of it that's superior to the old version. And it's usually, I know with the Game Boys, it was like every year. So all those things combined, I don't understand the kind of person that buys a Switch 2 right now, unless you really, really love you some Mario Kart World, and you card every damn day. But a lot of people are talking about how that game right now is underwhelming. You got to go around, you got to collect them stickers, you got to get them little tiny decals and put on your cart. Got to complete all those challenges. And then after that, it's an $80 game. I can't fucking believe. Will that game have DLC? Oh, they wouldn't dare to actually release DLC for that game. It being $80, would they? Well, I say that, but it is Nintendo. So yeah, I think a very stupid decision by Nintendo not to actually assist these developers in giving them dev kits so people that have a Switch 2 would have some AAA games in the pipeline to look forward to. But if you're actively discouraging that and choosing to give it to, these little indie makers like Oink Games, then you might have a situation where the Switch 2 has a ton of, cheap indie games that you might not even care about, and the real AAA developers are just waiting. They're just waiting on Nintendo to get their shit together and give them some dev kits.